behalf of the staff, board of directors, and our entire team, welcome to the historic Hayti. As was said, yes, I am Angela Lee, the executive honored to host this gathering. Our ancestors built and opened this space in 1819. Their advocacy provided a place of worship, healing. The spirit of those ancestors remains ever present in space. We thank Senator Sanders and all of our speakers for their advocacy. Thank all of you. Whether facing challenges of vice highway or unfair wages for work, we must all advocate for humanity. Truly, life, liberty, and happiness are empty concepts. We don't have quality of life, liberty, and justice for all, and the pursuit to achieve equity and equality. Thank you. And I really believe that our ancestors. So again, thank you. Thank you for your support of the Hayti nonprofit art education organization that has been a cultural hub in and around decades.
Thank you. Now please welcome Annie Saludo.
Hi, everyone. It is an honor and a privilege to be here. And I work at the REI store in Durham. Just 1 week ago today, our store voted in an NLRB election to unionize. Unable to pay for their groceries and their pets' food. I learned of coworkers struggling to pay their rent or living in their cars. It should not be that people have to decide whether to eat or pay their bills today. We unionized not only to increase our pay and hours to match the rising cost of living, but to have an active role in shaping our working conditions. We've been a community long before we started to unionize at Durham, and now we are internally organized. We have the power to fight for a safe working environment, consistent hours, and the affordable health care we need. REI has a guiding company value, and that is, we go further together. In the Durham store, me and my coworkers believe this. And we believe it not only for ourselves, we want a living wage for all workers. We support lifting up the baseline that employers are required to pay to ensure that nobody is stuck choosing between groceries and rent. We support lifting up the baseline so that those of us with years of experience in our fields can have the opportunity to earn more. We shouldn't work for a company for more than a decade and still live paycheck to paycheck. When we raise the floor, we all benefit. It's an honor to share this stage with so many fellow activists and change makers who are holding all of our employers to account. We are super excited at REI Durham to begin negotiating our contract and watch our REI union movement continue to expand, coast to coast, north to south. Thank you all for the support we've felt from our customers, the Greater Triangle, members across the country, and to Senator Sanders himself. We really do go further together.
Thank you. Now please welcome Chris Stardy.
USSW. How y'all doing? My name is Chris Daugherty, and I'm a member of the Union of Southern Service Workers. Thank you. I'm proud to say we are organizing with other service workers all across the South. We're not just demanding fair pay, we're demanding safety, respect, and a voice on the job. Yes. I work at Spring Hill Suites by Marriott in Durham, and I make $13 an hour. Let's be honest, $13 an hour is not a livable wage. I'm not able to be independent. I'm not able to pay or afford rent, so I have to live with my mother. The cost of rent is skyrocketing all across Durham. I'm single, I do not have a wife or children, but I'm still struggling off $13 an hour. One thing about my fellow workers who are living off minimum wage and raising their kids, really, it's impossible. So I want to ask, why is Congress allowing these corporations to pay us unlivable wages? Congress has the obligation of, yes. Yes, Congress has the obligation to do the right things for workers like me. They need to make it easier for us to unionize, and they must raise the minimum wage to a true living wage. Congress, raise the minimum wage now, right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Now please welcome Ann Fields and her two little helpers.
Good evening. My name is Ann. I am the enormously proud mother of two spunky, curious, and energetic girls. My name, Ann, pronounced Anne, is the Turkish word for mother. This is the most important job I will ever have. My partner and their father is Turkish and an immigrant. Together, we have built a business literally out of our backyard. He has worked just about every job you can imagine, and many in this food industry making $2.50 an hour to reach this dream. I remember when Ada was born, 2 weeks later, I found out my pay in the public school system was getting cut. That very same day, our refrigerator died, and Ada had to be rushed to the hospital for an MRI. Ozan was back to working evening shifts the week she was born. We were navigating all these systems that were failing us. I had severe perinatal depression, anxiety, and OCD. I am a survivor, and it is the hardest battle I've ever fought. We got through this period with help from our family, friends, and I know I'm out on the other side because of my privilege. Many are not afforded that. We need a system that supports everyone. Most people in the U.S. are one paycheck's worth of an unforeseen expense away from being unhoused. We need a solid foundation for our babies to grow and flourish. If we don't even value those taking care of our infants, then what do we value? I think we all know you can't survive and definitely cannot thrive on $7.25 an hour. Why am I here tonight speaking about this? I am able to scrape together enough to shell out over half of my paycheck to daycare each month. Because all the mamas making $7.25 an hour are at their second job right now. In my job as a social worker, I've seen mothers return to work at 2 weeks postpartum. 2 weeks to a minimum wage job with zero benefits that doesn't care about that mother and that family. For all those in this room that have given birth, you know that is what it looks like when society has given up. When we aren't even doing the bare minimum for those birthing our children. We can do better. How? By paying our child care workers at least $17 an hour. How am I paying so much for childcare and they are paid so little? Does that sound like a rigged system to you? That's because it is a rigged system benefiting those that aren't even in this room tonight. So we have to stand up and stand out. I believe in a living wage for everyone. I believe in universal childcare. I believe it doesn't have to be this hard. I believe we can take care of each other. So to all you mothers, grandmothers, fathers, papas, babas, mommies, and abuelos out there tonight, we can take care of each other. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, please welcome Venus Sanders.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, in the community of Durham. My name is Venus Sanders, and it is a pleasure to be here speaking in front of all of you today. We all have the same thoughts and concerns. We would like for minimum wages to be raised. We are tired of living off of 50 cents an hour. I had the pleasure back in April to speak with Bernie Sanders and Senator Bob Casey at a town hall meeting in Washington, D.C. last April at a CARE summit. To reflect back on the speech that I had with Bernie Sanders at the town hall meeting, I felt that Bernie Sanders and Senator Bob Casey was very thoughtful and concerned about the low minimum wages that the average American make. We have no health care benefits. As previous speakers have spoke, we're working 2 or 3 jobs just to put extra food on the table. We have to decide if we're going to pay the cable bill this month, the rent, the water, the car payment, put new shoes on our kids' feet because they've gotten too small. I'm sick and tired of, at the age of 55, having to work 2 jobs. I should be able to work a full-time job, have full-time benefits, have a job that is willing to invest in my retirement plans. If I work an extra job at retirement age, it should be because I want to, not because I have to. And that is the difference. Wanting to go on vacation, wanting to take my children or my grandchildren to Disney World, wanting to be able to put all of my children through college, to give them a good college education. So with that being said, I myself do support Bernie Sanders on this campaign to go all through America to fight and to speak, to let America know and the government know that we are no longer working for 5 cents an hour. It is time that Washington, D.C. put some respect on our names and some respect on our check. As simple as that. So once again, I would like to thank you all for coming out with the support of Bernie Sanders and to support our fellow neighbors and our communities to make life better, not only here in Durham, North Carolina, but across the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you. Now please welcome Durham County Commissioner Nida Alam.
Good evening, Bull City. I said, good evening, Bull City. Are we all fired up, ready to go? My name is Nida Alam. I am a proud CWA union member, a proud mom, and I'm proud as hell to serve Durham every day as your county commissioner. But as proud as I am to be here tonight in beautiful historic Hayti, I have to say we shouldn't have to be here. It shouldn't take a rally for employers to treat their workers with dignity. It shouldn't take a national campaign for legislators to make a fair living wage a reality. It shouldn't take hearing it from a microphone for the media to pay attention to service workers and care workers, the backbone of our economy and society. And I see a lot of people in the crowd tonight who agree. So listen up, I want us to do something together really quickly. I want you to raise your hand and raise it high if you've ever worked a really tough job. And I want you to keep your hand up if you showed up every day and worked your ass off, no matter the circumstances. And keep your hand up if even when there were obstacles, you tried your best to treat everyone in your workplace with decency and respect, because you knew at the end of the day, we were in this together. Keep your hand up if you've had to stretch your paychecks to cover rent and groceries and medical bills because the cost of living gets higher and higher every year. And keep your hand up if you're tired of working so damn hard when the state doesn't work for you. That's right. We know the dignity of labor. We know what it's like to show up every day for a job. And we're here tonight because the state is not doing its job. The state is not doing its job when 1 in 5 North Carolinian children are living in poverty. The state is not doing its job when the minimum wage has been stagnant in North Carolina for 14 years. The state is not doing its job when that wage is $7.25 an hour, and what we need to make a living income in Durham County is now $23 an hour. Forget doing its job. The state isn't even clocking in, and that's a choice. Inequality is a policy choice. It's a choice to disinvest from communities of color and let gentrification drive out generations of families and businesses. It's a choice to defund public education and keep our children from learning their own history. It's a choice to let single parents work 2, 3, 4 jobs just to put food on the table. and we are here to demand better. And I'm proud of the work that we've done from the Commissioner's Office to raise the minimum wage in for Durham County employees to $15 an hour. But $15 an hour was only the beginning. We need a fair living wage all across the country, and we need it now. We need a state that actually acknowledges the dignity of labor, that does its job so that we can do ours. Venus Sanders is here tonight to demand it. Mama Cookie is here tonight to demand it. Annie is here tonight to demand it. Ann Fields is here tonight to demand it. Reverend Barber is here tonight to demand it. Bernie Sanders is joining us tonight to demand it. And together, all of us will rise up and demand it for every worker in North Carolina and across the country. Because when labor rights are under attack, what do we do? Stand up, fight back. When working families are under attack, what do we do? Stand up, fight back. When Durham County is under attack, what do we do? Stand up, fight back. Let's stand up and fight back tonight, Durham. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, please put your hands together for Bishop William J. Barber II, Founding Director of the Center for Public Theology and Public Policy at Yale Divinity School.
Forward together. Forward together. You are what the greedy aristocracy, particularly in the South, are afraid of. I want you to look at this room. Dr. King said, standing on the steps of the Alabama State House at the end of the Selma to Montgomery March, that voting rights was not just a black issue, but it was an economic issue. And he said the greatest fear of the Southern aristocracy and others was for the masses of poor black people and poor white people and others to come together and form a powerful new voting bloc that could fundamentally shift the economic architecture of the nation. You are the continuation of that reality coming true in the South. When Bernie Sanders called, Senator Sanders called, and we had a long conversation in his office, he asked me would I join him on a tour across the country. He asked me, as now the director of the Yale Center for Public Policy and Public Theology, if I would join him in helping to make the moral case, because he understands as a senator, if we're going to win this, we got to have more than just politicians. We got to have some preachers and rabbis and imams, because we have a moral crisis. So I stopped by this evening to say one thing as clearly as I know how. Living wages aren't a far left idea, they are a fundamental moral issue. And some things aren't about left versus right and conservative versus liberal, but they are simply about right versus wrong. We're in a church sanctuary that was a sanctuary for justice. When the children of Israel were forced to make bricks with no straw for less than a living wage, God told Moses to tell Pharaoh, the political extremist of his day, 4 words: let my people go. And today we say to the politicians and to the corporate leaders that still hold people hostage for less than a living wage, let my people go. I've been a preacher for almost 40 years, and I can tell you that any religious or moral leader who asks you to pay your tithes to a congregation but won't challenge corporations that are stealing your wages is morally suspect. And is engaged in a form of theological malpractice. Isaiah chapter 10 says, woe unto those who legislate evil and rob the poor of their rights and make women and children their prey. Jeremiah 22 in the Hebrew scriptures says, doom to those who build their palaces by unrighteousness, who build their upper rooms by injustice, making their own people work for nothing and paying them nothing for their labor. Jesus said the first good news of the gospel must be to preach good news to the poor, those who've been made poor by economic exploitation. And James, his brother, said that the laborer is worthy of his or her hire. Getting paid what you deserve is a moral issue. It's what the Constitution says we are all aspire to when it says we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, not establish injustice, but establish justice. And you can't establish justice when you have unequal and low-paid workers. Justice means giving people what they deserve. After the American Civil War, when African Americans served in Southern legislatures for the first time along with white brothers and sisters, many poor whites and former slaves figured out they had all been used by the racist aristocracy. They figured out they had been hoodwinked, they had been bamboozled, man. And so they came together, and the first thing they did was they rewrote constitutions all over the South, black and white together. And listen what North Carolina's constitution, rewritten in 1868, says. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all persons are created equal, not men, all persons are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, the enjoyment of the fruit of their own labor, and the pursuit of happiness. As far back as 1868, Keith, former black folk and white folk who came together and figured out that racism was an enemy to them all, they knew that labor rights and living wages and the enjoyment of the fruit of your own labor was the only way to overcome the vestiges of slavery. They understood it then. We must understand it now. Labor rights became a fundamental constitutional right, not in the turn of the century of the 1900s, but in 1868 in the South. That's why the Reconstruction of the South was fought so hard. That's why they killed so many people to pull and tear black and white people from working together in 1877 and 1888 and on and so forth. This has been a pattern in our nation's history. Divide and conquer. We never were what we should have been in this country, but every step forward, every stride toward a more perfect union has been the result of people coming together, pushed together by a movement towards higher ground with justice for all. And living wages and labor rights has always been at the center of any movement that has pushed this nation forward. When Frances Perkins, a white social gospelist, took over as the first woman labor secretary under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, she told him, I'm coming here to put my faith in policy. And one of the parts of her faith that she wanted to put in policy was to demand a minimum wage even then, and health care and Social Security. She was so pushy being on the inside that she made President Franklin Delano Roosevelt do a fireside chat, and he said these words in the 1930s: no business which depends on its existence on paying less than a living wage to its workers has any right to even continue in this country. That's moral language. Somebody say moral language. We know what's right. That's moral language. It's wrong for the richest nation in history of the world to pay to pay so many millions of its workers less than a living wage. It's wrong that the majority of those in raw numbers are white. But it's also wrong that half Almost half of African American workers make less than a living wage, and 60% of Latino workers make less than a living wage. It's just wrong. And it's wrong when women who already have to deal with the gender issue then have to turn around and deal with the low wage issue as well. It's wrong. It's wrong that down here in the South, where some politicians still pit white workers against workers of color, that 50% of all workers make less than a living wage. It's wrong that after we won living wage campaigns across the South, state legislatures then intervened and override municipalities to keep wages down. It's wrong that some economists are saying that the way you deal with inflation is you keep wages low. It's wrong when even county and city governments pass a $15 living wage, but then inside the language they say it won't happen for 10 years. It's wrong that greedy corporate criminals on Wall Street have gotten bailouts, while many of you who've insisted on the just fruit of your labor have been locked up when you got in the streets. It's just wrong. It's wrong that we call workers essential during the pandemic, but then we continue to treat them like they were expendable. You're essential, but we ain't gonna pay you a living wage. You're essential, but we're not gonna give you paid family leave. You're essential, but we're not going to give you health care. That is wrong and a damn shame in a nation like ours. The very people who saved our lives. It's wrong that the law still allows tipped workers in restaurants to be paid $2.16 an hour, which is nothing but an extension of slave labor into a service industry that was established after the Civil War. It's wrong. And we need moral clarity. Somebody say moral clarity. That can cut through the neoliberals and the trickle-down deceptions. We need moral clarity about this business where what we really need is full employment. And well, slavery was full employment. Full employment without living wages is just another modern form of pseudo-slavery. When somebody says, well, just be happy that we have low unemployment. Low unemployment and low wages is not a moral good. It is a moral failure. And look at where we are tonight in this debt ceiling issue. The moral priorities of extremists are so off that they say the fate of the world and the U.S. economy can only get resolved by kicking needy people off food stamps. What a disgrace. And how clear an emblem of the warped problem. That's why we have to have a moral movement. Not just a political movement, it is political and moral. 40% of the people in North Carolina are poor. 44% of North Carolinians today are poor and or low wealth. That's over 4.6 million residents. 53% of children, 1.2 million. 46% of women, 2.3 million. 58% of black people, 1.2 million. 67% of Latinos, 639,000. 36% of white people, 2.2 million before COVID. Before COVID. From 1979 to 2012, income from the top 1% in North Carolina grew by 129%, while income from the bottom 99 only grew by 1%, 11%. Living wages are about basic dignity. Dignity. But it's not just about dignity, it's about living. The inequality is insulting, but it's more than insulting, it's deadly. A recent study found out that poverty is the fourth leading cause of death in America before COVID. Poor people died at a rate 3 to 5 times higher than others during COVID, not because of COVID, but because of poverty. 330,000 people died during COVID, not because of COVID, but because of the lack of health care. Poverty, the death caused by poverty is higher than homicide, higher than respiratory disease, higher than diabetes, and higher than gun violence. This is why we must raise this as a moral issue. This is why religious leaders must raise it. This is why religious leaders may have to do like Emmett Till's mama did when her son was beaten to death. They may have to ask their members, if they have a member who loses a loved one because of policies that have kept them poor and without health care, they may need to say to the family, let's invite the media in, and during my eulogy, I'm going to point to your child and say, that's what policy murder looks like. And it doesn't have to be this way. We've raised wages in some cities and seen it doesn't take away jobs. That's a lie. The Nobel Peace Prize in economics a couple of years ago went to 3 economists who demonstrated with empirical data that raising the minimum wage doesn't cost jobs, nor does it raise prices per se. In fact, what it really does is it puts more cash in the hands of working people. It stimulates the economy. It enables people to make it through inflation, and it pumps billions of dollars into the economy. One of the worst votes we saw in history was when 49 Republicans and 2 Democrats chose to block the living wage vote. 51 people said no to 51 million Americans. In the richest nation in the history of the world, the only thing keeping us from paying people a living wage is a lack of moral conscience and the collective determination to make it happen. So, my brothers and sisters, when Senator Bernie Sanders said, come join me, the answer was an easy yes. My sisters and brothers that are here, you're not wrong to be here today. The folk in Nashville won't be wrong. The folk in South Carolina won't be wrong. And all over this country, we won't be wrong, because when I look out at this crowd today, I know that many of you know what it's like to be rejected. You've been rejected because of the color of your skin. You know what that's like. You know what it's like to be rejected because of the work you do. You know what it's like to be rejected because of where you're from. You know what it's like to be rejected because of your disability. You know what it's like to be rejected because of who you love. And you know what it's like to be rejected because of your income. But let me tell you a word of power. In my faith tradition, we have a psalm that says there comes a day when the stone that the builders rejected become the chief cornerstones in building a brand new nation. And that scripture ends by saying, and this is the Lord's doing. Well, when the stones that have been rejected come together, something powerful happens. And I want you to turn to your neighbor and say, you are the cornerstone and the backbone of this nation. It's time for us to build it again. Oh yes, oh yes. You are essential workers. You are the ones who risked your lives during COVID to save the rest of us. And whether you're a restaurant tip worker making $2.16 an hour or a low-wage worker making less than a living wage, it is time for us to call on this nation to raise the minimum wage to at least $17, and not 17 years from now, but right now and right here. We don't need no more lip service. We don't need you to congratulate us about how hard we work. We need living wages and some cash in our pocket. 2 days at the March on Washington, they called for a minimum wage of $2. If the minimum wage had been indexed for inflation since then, it would be almost 17. Some critics say that if you make $7.50 an hour, you're above the poverty line and you're in the lower middle class. Well, that's a lie. That's only $15,600 a year before taxes. There's not a county in this country where if you work a full-time job at $7.25 an hour, you can afford a basic 2-bedroom apartment and to feed your family. And politicians in D.C. have raised their own wages. They've made sure that corporate donors have all the money they need. Well, now is the time, and we won't be rejected anymore. We won't be denied anymore. We won't be pushed back anymore. This is not about Democrat or Republican, conservative or liberal. It's just about doing the right thing. This is not even about black versus white or brown or Asian or native, because when you make a poverty wage and you can't pay your light bill, we all black in the dark, baby. At least 17 now. Until families don't have to choose between buying medicine and buying food now. So that work has dignity, living wages now. If you really want people off public assistance and food stamps, then pay them a living wage now. If you want people to overcome inflation, pay them 17 now. If you believe we're supposed to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we want living wages now. 17 now. Justice now. Strengthen the foundation of the nation now. And for our part, we make you a promise, America. We're going to demand it now. We're going to lobby in the halls of Congress now. We're going to turn out in record numbers at the ballot now. We'll go to jail now. Minimum wage hadn't been raised for 14 years. Since 2009, no more excuses. No more workers rejected. No more families hurt without a living wage. The right time to do right is right now. Living wages now. Dignity now. Saving lives now. Right now. 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 Now. And I bring you the senator that's going to carry the water, Senator Bernie Sanders. He's coming on right now.
I don't hear anything. Durham! I am really sorry that I can't be with you tonight. But as Reverend Barber mentioned, we're here dealing with the debt ceiling issue. And there are going to be a bunch of votes taking place literally starting in a few minutes. Before I get into my remarks, I wanted to thank all of you for coming out. I wanted to thank all those who spoke earlier in the evening. Our musician, James Brown. Want to thank Annie Saludos. Want to thank Chris Dougherty, Annie Fields, Venus Sanders, Nita Allen. And I especially want to thank one of the great social justice leaders in this country, the Reverend William Barber. Reverend Barber, thank you so much for all that you do. Here is the simple truth. And the Reverend just stated it. In my view, there is no such thing as a blue state or a red state. I don't believe that for a second. When working people, if they're black and white and Latino and Native American, gay and straight, when we stand together, there is one state, and that is the state of justice. And that is what we have got to do. In the year 2023, in the richest country in the history of the world, no one in America should be forced to work for starvation wages. And let's be clear, $7.25 an hour in North Carolina and in other states is nothing less than a starvation wage, and that has got to change. It is time to raise the minimum wage to a living wage. And I'm here to tell you that as chairman of the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, the committee that has jurisdiction over this issue, with your help, we are going to raise that minimum wage to a living wage. And as the Reverend made so clear, and I so much enjoy hearing him speak, we can no longer tolerate a rigged and corrupt economy where the very richest people in this country get richer while tens and tens of millions of workers are falling further and further behind. There is no excuse, there really is none, why every man, woman, and child in this country should not receive and have a decent standard of living. This is not a radical idea. This is what we deserve as human beings. Health care is a human right, not a privilege. The right to take time off when your child gets sick because we have paid family and medical leave is not a radical idea. It exists in virtually every other country on earth. The need to address the climate crisis so that our kids can grow up in a healthy society is not a radical idea. You know, I'm sitting here in Washington, D.C., and a few hours ago I went out for a walk, and I was breathing here in Washington, D.C., smoke that came from a huge forest fire in Nova Scotia, Canada. And then another huge forest fire on the other side, western part of Canada. And they have heat waves and forest fires in Australia. The time is long overdue that Congress had the guts to take on the fossil fuel industry, transform our energy system, and save our planet. That is not a radical idea. Now, the truth of the matter is, and Reverend Barber made this point, that the economy today in America is doing extraordinarily well, just fantastic for the people on top, for the billionaire class. In fact, they have never, ever, in the history of this country, top 1% ever had it so good. But the truth is that if you are in the working class of our country, the vast majority of our people, you are being left further and further behind as our people every day struggle to pay their bills, put food on the table. I grew up in a family that lived paycheck to paycheck and know what it's like not to be able to buy the things the family needs. 60% of the American people today in the richest country on earth are living paycheck to paycheck. Billionaires are getting richer, and together we are going to change that dynamic and create an economy that works for all of us, not just the few. Today, while more and more working class Americans are unable to afford the health care and the prescription drugs they need, 3 people, if you can believe it, you don't see it much in the media, it's true, 1, 2, 3 multi-billionaires own more wealth than the bottom half of American society, 165 million people. 3 people here, 165 million over here. Today, we have more income and wealth inequality than we have ever had in the history of this country. While nearly 18 million American families are paying more than 50% of their limited incomes on housing, and housing costs I don't know about North Carolina, but I'll tell you that in Vermont, many other places, housing costs are soaring. Nearly 600,000 people are homeless. Despite all of that, the top 1% now owns more wealth than the bottom 90% of the people in our country. Today, while millions of ordinary workers are working longer hours for lower wages, the CEOs of the largest corporations in our country now make almost 400 times as much as the average worker. 400 times more. Do they need 400 times more health care? Do they need 400 times more food? But they got 400 times more income than the average person who works for them. And what's going on in this country today is that since 1975, and again, you don't hear this talked about on the halls of Congress, you don't hear this talked about in the corporate media, but since 1975, there has been a massive redistribution of wealth in this country. Massive redistribution. The problem is that it has gone in precisely the wrong direction. Over the past 48 years, more than $50 trillion in wealth, $50 trillion, has been redistributed from the bottom 90% to the top 1%. Primarily because a growing percentage of corporate profits have been flowing into the stock portfolios of the wealthy and the billionaires. $50 trillion going from the bottom to the top. What does all of that mean? It means that every day, working people are living under incredible stress, scared to death that if their car breaks down, they will not be able to get to their jobs and they're going to get fired. Scared to death that their kids get sick, or if their landlord raises their rent, or if they get divorced or separated, or if they become pregnant. If for whatever reason they lose their job, they will find themselves in the midst of a financial catastrophe. That's what stress is about. We don't talk about it much. But living paycheck to paycheck leaves you with no sense of security, no cushion to fall back on, and no quality time to spend with your family in a relaxed environment. And that kind of stress that so many millions of our people experience every day. How am I going to pay the bills? Where am I going to find childcare? My kid got sick. I can't afford health care. My landlord's going to throw me out of the house. That kind of stress is one of the reasons why, incredibly, the life expectancy of working people in America is much lower than those who are upper income. In other words, if you're working class, if you are poor, that is a death sentence. You're going to live 5, 10, 15 years less than the people on top. How outrageous is that? How, as the Reverend just told us, how immoral is that? Then that should not be happening in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. In America today, the average worker, and this is another incredible fact, we don't talk about it very much, but the average American worker makes about $50 a week less than he or she did 50 years ago after adjusting for inflation. Now think about that for a moment. Think about all of the incredible advances in technology that have been made over the past 50 years, computers, robotics, artificial intelligence, you name it. And the huge increase in worker productivity that has been achieved during that time. Workers now produce more. And yet, when all is said and done, real weekly wages for the average American worker are lower today than they were in 1973. Now, how's that possible? And the answer is that virtually all of the economic gains created by modern technology have financially benefited the people on top, not working people. Bottom line is that we have got to do better than that. And we can start, and it's just the start, and we got a lot of other things we have to do. But we can start that process of restoring dignity to ordinary people, of lowering the stress level, of allowing people to breathe a little bit, spend a few hours with their kids, with their spouses. We can do all of that by raising the minimum wage to a living wage at least $17 an hour. Now, in my view, we can no longer tolerate millions of our workers being unable to feed their families because they are working for inadequate wages. Let's be clear, and I don't think I have to explain this to anybody. Nobody, I don't care where you're living, nobody in America can survive on $7.25 an hour. That's preposterous. Nobody can make it on $9 an hour. You can't make it on $12 an hour. Yesterday we held a hearing in my committee on child care, and we heard about child care workers who do some of the most important work in America. They work with the little kids, help shape their lives, making $13 an hour. How outrageous is that? So we need an economy in which all of our workers earn a living wage. And it is not acceptable that in America today, nearly 35 million workers in America make less than $17 an hour. It is a national disgrace, really quite unspeakable, that Congress has not passed an increase in the minimum wage since 2007. Can you imagine that? Imagine all the money that's gone to the military, all the tax breaks that's gone to the wealthy and to the fossil fuel industry, and yet we haven't raised the minimum wage in all of that time. It is unacceptable that the minimum wage has lost 40% of its purchasing power since 1968. So yes, now is the time to raise the minimum wage to a living wage. A job in the United States of America should lift you out of poverty, not keep you in it. And let's be clear. Let's be clear. The overwhelming majority of Americans support raising the minimum wage to a living wage. They understand that this is not a radical idea, that it is a moral right, that it's something we have got to do. And this is what the American people want, and it tells us that in poll after poll. But it is not just the polls that tell us the American people want to raise the minimum wage. As a result of years of congressional inaction, cities and states all across this country are taking the low-wage crisis into their own hands and raising the minimum wage. That's what they're doing in states all across this country and in cities as well. In November of last year, just November of last year, a few months ago, nearly 60% of the people in Nebraska, this is not considered one of the most progressive states in this country. In Nebraska, 60% of the people voted to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. In November of 2020, 61% of the people in Florida, and I don't have to tell you about Florida, you know enough about Florida. 61% of the people in Florida voted to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Today, 13 states in America have approved a $15 an hour minimum wage. And you know what? As a result of inflation, $15 an hour back in 2021 would be over $17 an hour today. So let us be clear. Raising the minimum wage to $17 an hour is what the American people want, is what the American people need, and it most certainly is not a radical idea. According to MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a living wage for 2 working adults and 1 child, family of 3, in North Carolina is $19.81. $19.81 is what a living wage would be. This is what an individual in a household must earn to support his or her family. So the time is long overdue for Congress to act. Let us pass a minimum wage bill that is a living wage. Congress can no longer ignore the needs of the working class of this country at a time of massive and growing income and wealth inequality and record-breaking corporate profits. We must stand up for working families, many of whom are struggling every day to provide a minimal standard of living for their families. And while we deal with the minimum wage, we must also address the scandal of the tip wage. And Reverend Barber mentioned that. It's an important point to make. The tip wage, which has been stuck at an abysmally low, embarrassingly low, $2.13 an hour for more than 30 years, thanks in large part to the powerful restaurant lobby, which has spent millions in campaign contributions and lobbying expenses since 1991 to keep those workers in poverty. Raising the minimum wage to $17 an hour would provide an increase in pay for tens of millions of desperate Americans. Disproportionately, I might say, women, who often do the low-wage work in this country, and people of color. It would also be a huge boost to single moms. Let us not forget that these are the essential workers who kept the economy going during the worst of the COVID pandemic. I'm just repeating a point that the Reverend Barber made a moment ago. These are the people who, in the midst of this horrible pandemic, where people were dying by the thousands every single day, they went to work in hospitals and in other places, and some of them died because of what they were forced to do. And at that time, we called them heroes and heroines. Well, rhetorical praise is nice, but a livable paycheck is better. Let us do it. Let us do it. Let us have the courage to take on powerful special interests who make billions out of the sweat of people who are unable to feed their kids. So we have today an economic crisis and a moral crisis, and with your help, we are going to pass a minimum wage that will improve the lives of millions and millions of Americans. So let me just thank all of you for coming out tonight. I am so sorry that I'm not able to be with you. I look forward to it very, very much. But now I'm going to go back to the Congress, and I want to tell you that I'm not going to vote for that so-called debt ceiling bill, and I'll tell you why. I'm not going to vote for a bill which will cut programs for nutrition, for housing, for health care, for education, and not ask the richest people in this country to pay their fair share of taxes. And I'm not going to vote. I'm not going to vote for a debt ceiling which does nothing to help our kids or our elderly, but increases military spending by $56 billion over a 2-year period. The Pentagon has all the money it needs. It's the working class families in this country who need some help, not the military-industrial complex. So brothers and sisters, I want to thank you again for being out tonight. I want to thank all those who spoke. Together we're going to stand up and fight for justice and create an economy that works for all of us, not just the people on top. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you all very, very much.